Alexandre De Streel, welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. I say welcome again. It's great pleasure to talking to you, and you are obviously a top-tier researcher specializing in Digital Markets Act, but your background is rather different to the majority of researchers doing DMA, because unlike the majority who come from exclusively from the competition law legacy, you come from both competition law and sectoral regulation. So you have seen this movie before. It's a unique movie. We know that DMA is sui generis, etc., and yet there are some parallels. And also you have this remarkable position at CERRE, where you're not only academic, you also communicator with different stakeholders. So you sense what's going on and you understand and conceptualize. It's a great opportunity at us to discuss some nitty-gritties of the DMA, but also maybe some broader issues. And the milestone which we witnessed these days is the DMA review. So why shouldn't we start just with looking at the main advantages and some shortcomings of the DMA in the first phase of its enforcement?
Okay, so thank you very much, Oles, for your invitation, and thank you very much for running this excellent podcast. I think it's really a public good, a European public good that you should be proud of and of which we all benefit. I am really impressed by the quality of your question and the discussion, and so I'm really honored to be part of this series. So yes, in a way, it is true. The DMA movie, if you want, or the movie, as you call it, of the interplay between regulation and antitrust has been played before. And I think there are a lot of lessons, and maybe we can come back to that later, of past experience of this interplay between competition law and regulation that could be learned here, because sometimes, I have the impression that we reinvent the wheel. And also the second point I wanted to make is that for me, and I think now for the general court in the TikTok designation case, it is very clear that the DMA is not antitrust. Yes, it is start with antitrust case, and it is still, to my taste, a bit too much owned by the antitrust community, but it is not antitrust. Okay, it is regulation, and regulation have, even if they have the same objective they may have the same objective of antitrust, they have very different mode of functioning, and we can come back to that later. But I think it's really, really important, because I think too often we see the DMA as a form of antitrust or antitrust plus, and that has, I think, some effect of how it is enforced, which sometimes are the weaknesses, and we can come back to that. But let's go to your first question on the report of the DMA review. I mean, everyone was waiting this report. And, not surprisingly, the Commission says, okay, everything is fine. We just need to enforce even better or even more forcefully. Now, I broadly agree with the Commission. What I'm a bit at ease is that it's the Commission evaluating its own homework. I guess unless you have a lot of students like me, and if I was asking them, evaluate your homework, I mean, all of them would say it's an A, or some would say A plus, some would say A minus, depending of their honesty. But nobody would say it's a D or a E. So I think that we have a kind of institutional problem here, that the Commission is supposed to evaluate its own homework, and so I think we should really, for the next review and evaluation, do that differently, and it should not be the Commission in charge of it, but it should be an independent panel of experts or the Court of Auditors or whatever. But basically, no, that remark aside, that important remark aside, I noticed in the report three positive effects of the DMA and three things which I would say I didn't note them in the report or not enough. So the first thing, the positive of the report, is that it's clear that the DMA has already had some positive effect in the sense of creating more opportunity for business users. So we have, and for developers, so we have new app store. It's easier to interoperate if you have wearables with some operating system, some ecosystem. You have also alternative browser and search engine which could thrive because of the new choice screen. So clearly some new opportunities have been offered, and that is leading to innovation. The second thing is the second type of positive effect that are mentioned in the report of the Commission, and with which I agree, is that the user have more agency. Okay, so they have more possibility to choose their services, to port their data. And basically, I always have seen the DMA as the anti-matrix law, coming back to the Matrix movie, where you were in one ecosystem and it was very difficult. You had to take this pill, I don't remember the color, to go outside of the ecosystem. Now, hopefully it's easier than in the Matrix movie to go outside of the ecosystem, and in part thanks to the DMA. So that's the first positive thing I read in the report, and I agree. The second positive thing is the resilience of the DMA. What is called is future proofing. No, I don't know this term is a little bit, it's not very elegant, I think, but okay, it's resilient. And it's resilient on different accounts. It's resilient with the new digital services which are coming, like cloud and AI, and there is a lot of discussion of how much problem there is there, and how much, if there is some problem, the DMA could deal with it. But I would say that the Commission do a convincing case that the DMA as it is could deal with the problem that we can see today. And so we don't need to completely revise the DMA, amend the DMA, as some are calling for. By the way, I think it will be politically unwise, given the geopolitical context, to reopen a legislative negotiation of the DMA. But that's a part. I don't think that it's even needed. So, the DMA is resilience for new services, but it's also resilience to new geopolitical challenges. We know that the big challenges of Europe today is its digital sovereignty, and that we have to develop more our own infrastructure, our own technology. And of course, the DMA is not the masterpiece for that, but it's an important element of it, because it helps switching from one service to another, from one infrastructure to another. And if we want to develop new European services and infrastructure, look, the DMA would make the transition from one American or Chinese service to a European service easier. So you see that it's also for kind of those geopolitical challenges, the DMA is quite resilient. And then the last point that the Commission mentioned, and with which I agree, is the harmonization effect of the DMA. Because, let's be clear, if there was no one DMA, there will be maybe not 27, but at least 20, which would not be the same. So, no, the harmonization is not complete, and there are still some issues. I get that. But I think that it's a big step towards a more harmonization. So, positive effect, resilience, and harmonization are, I would say, three positives of the DMA, which are very well reflected in the report. Now, where I think the report could have been better, and that is linked to my introductory point, that it's the Commission evaluating its own homework, is that the Commission, the report mentioned a lot the benefit, but not very much the cost. Yes, they mention en passant the compliance costs, saying that anyway they are concentrated on gatekeeper and things like that. But I think the compliance costs have been vastly underestimated in the impact assessment. So clearly, there is much more compliance cost for the gatekeeper than what anticipated. No, that doesn't mean that they are not worth it, because it's always a cost-benefit analysis. But I don't think that we should undermine those costs. But the second thing, because that's not what worries me the most, but what worries me the most is the adaptation cost for the user. And that's something that the Commission mentioned briefly, but it's true that learning to choose is not easy. I don't know you, but I always hesitate when I have too much choice option, and so it can create stress on people and so on. So yeah, maybe it's good on the long term, because it preserves, let's say, the competitive process, but it's creates some friction. And in a way, I would say that we need to learn that, and maybe we need to help fund it. So it's a cost, at least it's a short-term cost that should not be neglected. And then, of course, there is an opportunity cost. Some innovation were not deployed or were deployed later in Europe than in other parts of the world. No, again, I don't want to blame the Commission or the DMA for all the delay of some services. Sometimes it was because I think it was malicious compliance. It was done on purpose. But I think sometimes indeed there was some uncertainty and some delay have been done. So I think those are one element, so the cost. The second element where I think the Commission could have gone further, they mention it, but they don't mention it enough, or they don't substantiate that enough, is that they say that they would need an evaluation framework, a cost benefit evaluation framework for the DMA. Okay, and I agree. And at CERRE we have produced a first grid of what could be the cost and what could be the benefit to be evaluated. But I think that you should do that now. If you want to have a serious evaluation in 3 years, you should at least know already today what kind of information you would collect. And I'm a little bit disappointed that this effort has not been even started by the Commission. And I think that they really should do that. And then the third element where I think they are a bit léger, if I may say so, is on consistency. Okay, legal consistency between the DMA and the other part of the EU digital rulebook. They say it's like, as we say in French, nearly a pétition de principe. They say it's like that, and so it is, that it is consistent. But I don't think everything is consistent first, but what I would like to have seen is exactly what they have done in the DSA evaluation report, first evaluation report last year, where there was a fascinating exercise, very good exercise that they have done, where they analyzed the consistency of the DSA and more than 50 other European law. And I think that this exercise would be very useful to do also for the DMA. So basically on the things to improve, I would say, is to better take into account the costs, to have a better evaluation framework so you can be ready for a good evaluation in 3 years, and then to do the same exercise that was done for the DSA in terms of interplay between the DMA and other European law.
Perfect. Let us try to unpack different elements of this observation. That's very comprehensive, very detailed observations. But I wanted to one caveat, a question on the side, which would somehow let me invite you to answer it and then forget about it and then look at technicalities. Wouldn't we? So when we were when the DMA was designed, one of the powerful elements of its DMA quastique was this vagueness, and the ability to interpret obligations of Article 6.7. So it was kind of not bug but feature, the lack of clarity, the ability to open textured provisions, and thus it's kind of a trump card for the Commission to not. It's not only about being agile and future proof, but also about being more powerful and kind of arbitrary or discretional, demiurgical for creating this order. I assume you disagree. It would be too radical. But if this would be the case, would providing more clarity, would providing self-assessment benchmarks, clear benchmark, would it diminish this demiurgical trump card, which the Commission, whether it wants it or not, it still holds it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, I mean, this is the debate of precise rule versus open standard. Bon, let's be clear that compared to competition law, the DMA is much more precise and much more towards the rule-based system than a standard-based system. And I think it's a good thing, especially when you have a new law and a new regulatory culture, to start with relatively precise rule, because they are easier to enforce. So, all those people who have said the digital market are very flexible, so they need flexible rule, I partly agree and partly disagree, because I think this debate should be seen or this issue should be seen as a dynamic way. And I think when you have a new law or a new legal regime, I think it's always good to start with precise rule, because that's how everyone can learn, and it's easier to learn with precise rule than with unprecise rule. So, and if you take the example of telecom that I know best, if you look at the directive of the 90s, they were very precise. Okay, the obligation, the target, and so on. And then there was a big reform in at the turn of the century, where the rule became more flexible, but because the regulator had learned more and were better, I would say. So I would say that the rule here are relatively precise, or at least more precise than competition law, and more precise than some some commentator would have liked. But still, indeed, a self-executing rule, as the Commission was referring sometimes to DMA, do not exist. I mean, do not exist in law, and surely do not exist in digital, where the market, the technology are evolving all the time. So yes, I mean, this part of fluidity in the rule leads to more discretion to the Commission. I would not say arbitrariness, because that's a kind of judgment value that I would not say. But I mean, yes, more discretion. And so the question is, how you deal with those discretion. And there, I think there is several issues. There is first, to be sure that there is internal and external process to be sure that the Commission indeed do not use this power in an arbitrary manner. And I would say that with some internal process that there is in the Commission, and most of all, the control of the court, and also this systematic consultation, for instance, when the Commission is doing a specification measure, you can reduce the risk, can reduce quite substantially. And maybe even totally the risk, or in quasi-totally the risk of arbitrary. So that's one thing. The second thing, which is to me equally important, is legal predictability. Because, the gatekeeper needs to know what they need to do, and the business user need to know what they can expect from the gatekeeper. And it's true that today, I think the legal predictability is not yet optimal. And I think there are two reasons for that. The first is because the law is new. And so there is always at the beginning of a new legal regime, sometimes to clarify the law. So that's normal in a way. Look, I mean, the GDPR, the telecom, and so on, it took several years to be clarified. But there is a way to accelerate this clarification process, or this clarification process through court, via guidelines or specification decision. And I'm very happy that the Commission is doing that more today, and mentioned that a lot in the evaluation report. Because I remember some discussion I had with the Commission 3 years ago. They were very reluctant to adopt guidelines. And why? Because they had this antitrust mindset. It's true, in antitrust, you in general adopt guidelines to codify practice, not to announce a policy direction. And we can just refer back now to the recent draft merger guidelines. I mean, this is codifying practice. I mean, this is not changing practice. So some people are upset about that, others are very happy about that. But it's a fact that in general, in antitrust, the guidelines tend to codify practice. And so they only come after the practice has taken place. While in regulation, often the guidelines are adopted at the very beginning to give the direction. Let's take the example of net neutrality, for instance, an important regulation of net neutrality, which was adopted in 2015. The next year, there were some guidelines which were adopted to indicate what exactly the net neutrality regulation means. So, I think that if you are in a regulatory regime, it's good to adopt guidelines at the beginning. And so that's why I'm very happy that the Commission is working on those guidelines, on the interplay between the DMA and the GDPR with the European Data Protection Board. But I think that we need more of this. So that's the first thing, guidelines. Then the second thing is specification. And specification is a very important tool also for the Commission to clarify what is legally acceptable in terms of compliance. And so the Commission has adopted already two specification decisions against Apple, as we know, and now is looking at two others regarding Google. I think it's very good because it's giving more legal predictability. The the thing which should surprise me in a way is that a lot of gatekeepers are complaining that there is not sufficient legal predictability, but none of them so far have asked for specification decision. So all the four specification decision process that the Commission has initiated were initiated ex officio. So I think there is a little bit of a contradiction in the rhetorics of the gatekeeper when they say on the one hand, and I tend to agree with them, that sometimes the things are not clear enough, but at the same time, they are not asking for specification. And so maybe in the next series of your podcast, you have someone from the gatekeeper. I think that would be a good question to ask them because to me it's still a contradiction, but maybe they have an explanation.
Hopefully they do. So you have published this study with several co-authors where you look at the elements of this greater clarity, and regardless whether you agree or disagree with the normative or the implications for this, you can definitely, it's hard not to admire the robustness of thinking and how clear and forward-looking this criteria. You mentioned many of them, and you also looked at specification decision as another mechanism for bringing up this certainty, whether needed or not needed for obvious reasons. But I have some problems with, and that my question is about the problem. With 82 guidance or paper on exclusionary abuses in early 2000s, the Commission somehow shoot itself in the foot by limiting its own discretion, and obviously we understand that if you issue guidelines, it's binding for you, even if it's soft law. You have to. So wouldn't it be the case that by making one tiny mistake in the guidelines, you become exposed to this vulnerability and you become more fragile? So how scrupulous the legal service must be in terms of designing it against this potential risk?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. But, as always, life is full of trade-off and policy decisions are full of trade-offs. So, yes, of course. I mean, if you adopt guidelines, you limit your discretion, but up to a point. So it is true that the court has recognized, and I think rightly so, that if an institution adopt guidelines, it is binding at least that institution because it is creating legitimate expectation. But there is always the possibility to have a kind of exceptional circumstances clause, which is to say, okay, that's normally what we will do, but if there is some exceptional element that you mentioned, we could deviate from this. And the second thing is that those guidelines can be updated. If you look at, well, okay, you mentioned the 102 guidance paper. Now it is about to be updated into a fully fledged guidelines. Hopefully that we will get it this year. I'm always a bit surprised how long it takes to adopt those guidelines, but okay, that's another point. So you have that also in consumer protection. You have that. So I mean, guidelines is a living document also. So it's not that it is set up once and for all. I mean, it's not like like the treaty, where you can still change it, but it's very difficult. So I would say that first, there is some flexibility. Second, I think, yes, it's maybe good to limit a little bit the discretion because at least, you know which direction, which policy direction, because, remember, the DMA is a regulation, therefore a policy instrument, which policy direction you want to go. And I think everyone, the gatekeeper first, have the right to know because, I think sometimes it is true the Commission says that and then add another thing and then add another thing. No, I'm not in those negotiations, so I cannot tell whether it's true or not. But I mean, many gatekeepers told me that. And I understand that is complicated for them. So I think that if we have a little bit more clarity through guideline and specification decision, I think overall, even if it is this limitation of the discretion of the Commission, I would say is even a good thing. It's even a good thing. And remember, those guidelines are still a living and flexible document anyway.
You mentioned this empirical note that many gatekeepers tell you that they themselves don't know what will happen to, well, I paraphrase a little bit, what will happen tomorrow, whether we'll be under deeper scrutiny or receive some flexibility for the following year or so. Do you think, speaking with the DMA team, do you think they or some of them would be willing to have this vagueness and instrumentalize this vagueness, or it's just a matter of time and we only there is a consensus that more clarity is needed and it's just a matter of priorities and we are very busy in this for 3 years?
Yes, I think, I mean, I don't know. Again, you have to discuss with them, so I cannot speak for them. But I think it's more and more recognized that some legal predictability is necessary. And I think that is why the Commission is moving towards guidelines and specification more than before. Also, I think, yes, it takes time. I mean, because you have to have a better grasp of the market and everything before adopting those. So I think it's normal that, let's say, that in the first year you don't have it because the Commission had to first create the team and understand and so on. So for me, I think the rhythm of where the Commission is progressing on that topic is satisfactory. But again, I mean, I'm not within those discussions, and so I cannot judge. But I think that, to me, the important thing is that that's the direction: more legal predictability through specification and guidelines.
Let us have a look at a specific issue related to guidelines, joint DMA GDPR guidelines draft. We see when looking at the text of the DMA, a juristic maybe phantasmagoria immediately or this kind of obsession with conflict, irresolvable conflict, immediately picks the provisions of Article 8.1, where it refers to when complying with the obligations of the DMA, gatekeepers have to also comply with GDPR, Cyber Resilience Act, and other legislation because it said such as or something like, for example. And thus, the question emerges, how should I manage to get meaningful outcomes from even from specification decisions on 611, let's say, if there is another trump card, which the Commission has trump cards with uncertainty. The gatekeepers have trump card saying, well, we have to comply. The DMA is not superior to other legislation, and we care about our users. They never give consent, etc. So they know how to make it very appealing and indeed meaningful counter arguments why the compliance. So is it a zero-sum game, or you can find a meaningful compromise between the two extremes?
Look, I mean, I do think that the tension between the DMA, which is, let's say, a contestability competition objective, the GDPR, which is a privacy objective, and the cybersecurity, which is, a security objective, are sometimes exaggerated. Okay. So I think that the first things policymaker, regulator should do, and every stakeholder, is to minimize as much as possible those tensions and try to find way of providing your services which is trying to minimize those tensions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that yes, some tensions are inevitable. I agree. And the question is how much the regulator, the different regulator in charge of the different instrument, are able to give an indication to the gatekeeper. Okay, that's how we do the trade-off, how we arbitrate the trade-off between different instruments. So basically, to me, the joint guidelines of the Commission and the GDPR on the interplay between the DMA and the GDPR should do that. So first, you should try to show that how to minimize the trade-off as much as possible, and for the remaining trade-off, to try to give some indication that in this case we will privilege this interest, in that other case we privilege this other interest. Because if they don't do it, at the end of the day it will be the court and ultimately the European Court of Justice which will have to do that. but by then we will have lost a lot of time, and also I think the regulator, being an expert authority, are better able to do that trade-off technically than the court. But yes, I mean that's a difficult thing, and that is why I would have liked to see, for instance, I would like to see in the final product of the guidelines, for instance, a more safe harbor, where the Commission and the EDPB are saying, okay, if you do that, you are safe. Because today, what they do is they say, okay, it would be nice to do that, but it's not that they then, to come back to your previous question, that they limit their discretion and they say, if you do that, we will not intervene. So I think, the draft guidelines are going in the right direction, but I would push it a little bit further to give more legal predictability, and how, by having those kind of safe harbors, saying if you do that, we think that it's compliant with the DMA and with in this case, the GDPR.
I'm very tempted to ask you again, kind of a question on the margins, but so from your communication with different stakeholders, do you think it's kind of who keeps the poker, for whom it's more difficult to keep the poker face? Is it like the Commission who is struggling to bring order and deliver meaningful, measurable, tangible results, or the gatekeepers are being exhausted by this never-ending compliance requirements and the fear that they can be multiplied at any moment once the enthusiasm reappears? Any signs where who is winning this
I would
game?
say that, but maybe that's my middle ground attitude of life in general. But I would say that both are struggling. The Commission, because it's really difficult, because it's a new task for the Commission, and they have to coordinate a lot of different interests. So yes, the Commission is learning the DMA and learning to cooperate. On the other hand, you have the gatekeeper, which you remember they come from a world where they make fun of regulation. You remember move fast and break things, including breaking law. To a world where they have to have, as it is mentioned often in the Commission report, evaluation report, a culture of compliance. And we should not underestimate this cultural shift that is required, because we should always remember, that those big tech are coming from a libertarian environment. If we go back, I always like to refer back to the John Perry Barlow declaration on the independence of the cyberspace, which to me capture very well this libertarian spirit. But this is the corporate identity of many of those big tech. And I mean, we may like or not, but it's a fact. And it's not easy to fight your own corporate identity, I would say. So basically, I would say that both are struggling because both are requiring a lot of change. And what worries me sometimes, is that there is still not yet a trust between the Commission and at least some of the gatekeeper. And without trust, you cannot have a good regulatory system. It's impossible. So trust is the basis of everything, And so I think, to me, the main thing on which every stakeholder should work, and that is why at CERRE we are trying to always involve all the sides, the gatekeeper, the business user, the representative of the end user, and the regulator, to try to do our little contribution to this to the trust building. But of course, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's the main actors who should do that. And something I had not anticipated at all when I was working on the DMA when it was adopted, is that it's much more complicated to create a trust when you have a regulator in one jurisdiction coming from one certain culture, and the regulatee in another jurisdiction coming from another culture. And, because you were referring to a previous regulatory regime like telecom, for instance, it was tough, but at the end of the day, the regulator and the regulated company were knowing each other. Sometimes they were sitting in the same universities during their studies and so on. So there was a kind of implicit trust that was helping, the explicit trust mechanism which is needed for a good regulatory regime. Here we don't have it. I guess none of the commissioner have studied with the CEO of the big tech. And so that's why also it's even more complicated to implement the DMA than another regulatory instrument, because you have this cultural cultural differences, which of course now are fueled by the Trump administration. They play on it too, or they reinforce them. But I think that's to me a big issue. So to come back, and sorry, it's a very long answer for to your question, but I would say everyone is struggling so far. But at the end of the day, what is the most important thing is to have more trust among the players, and I don't see that happening so far, for at least with some players.
Let me ask you, Alex, two questions about matters related to external to the DMA, namely DSA and other jurisdictions. So the DSA, you mentioned that when reporting on the review process, they have shown the same team or the same DG pretty much, some differences in terms of how DMA is being reported. What else can we learn by looking at our kind of sister regime, at twin regime? I still hope that you like both regimes, but you are more embedded in the DMA. So tell us as an outsider to the DSA, but yet those who knows the mechanism very well.
Yeah, so Filomena Chirico, who was one of the mother of the DMA and the DSA when she was in the team of Commissioner Breton, always say, I mean, those are two sisters, and she always present the DSA and the DMA as two sisters. And I mean, she knows the stuff more than anyone else, so she should be right. And indeed, I mean, they address both law. At the end of the day, address the same company. I mean, if I'm talking about the part of the DSA, which is addressing the very large online platform, so they address more or less the same company, more or less the same business model. So clearly, they are the two faces of the same coin. No, they have, of course, different objectives. And I would say that the DMA is mostly about diffusing power, diffusing big tech power through more contestability and more competition, while the DSA is more about governing this platform power. If, in a way, the DMA don't work, as a backstop, if I may say so, we have the DSA, which is governing the platform power. So yes, they have different objectives, but they are, looking at the same company, the same business model. And I think they should be really implemented in interaction and maximizing the synergies. This is also something that Rita Wezenbeek of the DG Connect always mentioned, and I think she's very right to that. Yet, I think in the academic debate, in the policy debate, and even in the regulatory debate, those are still very different community. And it surprised me that when I am in a DSA conference, there is nearly no panel on the DMA, and vice versa. When I'm in DMA conference, no panel on the DSA. So I think, we academics, we have an effort to do and to look. Same for regulator. But I give you three concrete examples where those synergies could be improved. Online advertisement. You have some provision, transparency provision mostly in the DMA, and you have some regulatory provision in the DSA regarding what you can do with children, for instance, with sensitive data and so on. So, the transparency that you gain in the DMA would probably be useful to see whether the obligation of the DSA are respected. Second example, personalization and recommended system. Again, more transparency obligation in the DMA and a number of obligation in the DSA. For instance, there is this fascinating provision that you have under the DSA that you have the right to have a non-profiled recommended system. Non-profiled recommended system. So you have the right not to be profiled, which I would say should become an important human right in the digital society. So for me, it's this DSA provision is a kind of a premises of something much bigger, the right not to be personalized. And then in terms of dark pattern or what I prefer to call harmful online choice architecture, we have some provision in the DSA and in the provision in the DMA. So I think that those are three examples, but there are probably many others where the synergies between the law and in a way, they can reinforce each other better. So in the DSA evaluation report of last year, where the Commission studied the consistency between the DSA and other law, those elements are mentioned in the report. So that's great. But I think now we should do more in terms of enforcement.
Let me ask you, you mentioned online advertising. When observing the development in the DMA, we see that the most is going on in the sectors where we have powerful business users who can create narrative. We also know that a lot is going on in online advertising as business, not as at the end of this chain, but at the machinery of online advertising. It's one of the key elements for generating profits, converting your digital muscles into your pecuniary muscles. Maybe I'm looking at other sectors, but it looks that in addition to antitrust cases, we don't have much taking place in the DMA in enforcing the DMA obligations, not through the prism of compensation, but through the prism of access to information, which can potentially allow those skillful innovators to develop something which you can somehow do snake oil in and develop your own maybe machinery.
No, I agree. I mean, well, two things. So first, I mean, the DMA provision regarding online ad are relatively limited to transparency. Yeah? So clearly, I think among the DMA provision, they are probably among of the weakest because they just ask you to be transparent, but they nothing more. And the idea is, I guess, by understanding better how the value chain function, then you could act on other legislative instruments like the DSA or like competition law and so on. So, but I agree with you that it's not where we have seen the biggest advance, but I think it's because the obligations are weaker than some others, and I don't think the Commission has prioritized that. My impression is that the Commission has prioritized the Article 5.2 on the combination of data and the meta cases, and the opening of the mobile ecosystem, and in particular all the interoperability case with Apple. So I would say that the Commission has prioritized that, and maybe that was right, because clearly the Commission cannot do everything at the same time, and so it has to prioritize according to what is the biggest problem, where is the biggest impact, and so on. So I think that it may come later, but it's clear that I personally am not satisfactory with the way online advertising is dealt with. And I always come back to this comparison, but I think it's quite interesting to think about it. But if you were asking to many Europeans, would you agree that schools are financed by advertisement? And you would have advertisement in the class and everything, and maybe the teacher will have some T-shirt for a company and so on. People would say, "Are you mad or what?" But and rightly so, I think. But in a way, for some digital services which have the same influence, or even more influence than the school, like social networks, search engine, and now Gen AI, we accepted that is financed by advertisement. And I think I always think that a little bit strange because those services are as essential and as forming your the way you think. And we know that if a service is financed by advertisement, this is influencing the incentive of the provider of the services. I mean, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, in their own academic paper on PageRank, they mentioned that. They mentioned that it will affect the incentive, and in a way, they were pleading for not having a search engine which is financed by advertising. So I would say that to me, we neither with the DSA nor the DMA, we address that fundamental. Some have called that is the original sin of the internet, and I would tend to agree.
Alex, I jump from one topic to another, and it's the end of the hour. I yet wanted to ask you about the consultation on AI services. Please elucidate what exactly, we understand the stakes, but what exactly was at the stake at this consultation? What were potential scenarios and which one is the most suitable in your view?
So, there I also like what the Commission is saying in the report. And the way I read the Commission approach by reading the DMA report is a three-prong approach. So first, to better understand what are the problems, because it's not yet clear, is it a competition problem? Is it a sovereignty problem? Is it a little bit of both? So I think, everyone has his own view of the problem, but I think it would be interesting to see whether there is a problem and what's the problem. Then the second thing is, once you have identified the problem, whether the DMA can solve the solution. And I would say, with the choice screen, which can fight exclusivity and leverage, with the vertical interoperability and with the data portability, those are three very powerful obligations that are mentioned in the Commission report, which I would say could deal with most of the problems which have been identified so far. Now, maybe others will come. And I'm talking about the competitiveness problem, the competition problem. I'm not talking about the sovereignty problem. And then, if that is not enough, I think the Commission is saying then maybe we will have to designate some genuine provider as a virtual assistant. And in a way, we had also a report at CERRE 2 years ago, which were written by Jan Kramer and Frison Botstum, where they come more or less with the same conclusion, saying, I mean, the DMA is sufficiently resilient to deal with the problem that have been identified so far. So that's how I see the things. But what worries me, what we have to be very mindful is not to confuse every problem, and in particular the competition issue and then sovereignty issue. They are linked, but they are very different.
So, and in terms of technicality, whether you designate a separate a core platform service, AI as a core platform service, or as part of the existing core platform services, there are some tangible implications.
Look, my impression is that you should do the second of your strategy. So to try to say that some designation cover the AI which is used to operate the services which have been identified. And I think maybe with a lot, you can solve a lot of problem with that. If that is not enough, then you go for a specific designation. But I would go with the first strategy first and see where it leads us to.
Okay, we only have a couple of minutes left. I know how busy you are. So very quick questions and maybe answers. Mentioned sovereignty several times. Should the mission of the DMA be just opening up a little bit of contestability here and fairness there, as Christina Cafaro would say, or it should be something related to contributing to European? So where should I choose as an end user from if there is nothing European coming pretty much on my choice screen, because there is pretty much not much alternative, which would be not only powered by the ethos of getting greener and morally superior, but also be as functional, seamless, and intuitive as the current gatekeepers.
Yes, so two things on that. So first, I think the DMA can contribute to digital sovereignty, but not massively. So basically, how it can contribute is that it can help the switching from the existing services to a new one. But exactly as you say, I mean, you need to have the new one to switch to something else, a new one which is sufficiently good for the people to be able to go. And that's, for that, you need a different type of policies. And I would say what you need is industrial policy, which is European and not national. We cannot have 27 Silicon Valley. I mean, there is one in China, there is one in the US. There is no reason that we have 27. So a European industrial policy, and B, a European policy which, stimulate the winner, the next player, and not protect the loser of yesterday. And too often, I think in Europe, we tend to focus because they are able to lobby and capture of the loser of yesterday instead of focusing of the winner of tomorrow, you know. So I think if we have a right industrial policy, European and encouraging innovation, I think we can then develop our own alternative infrastructure. And then the DMA will just be a way to help the switching. But let's be clear, I mean, the DMA is maybe only a side dish for sovereignty. It's a
But
dish, but a side dish.
and you, as a matter of academic curiosity, you've been searching for different models of how the things are being done elsewhere. I don't refer to other digital market rules because obviously Europe is much more advanced, so that I don't expect we can learn much about them, maybe on the margins, but about other ways to boost your national champions, perhaps, or create more competitive markets. I don't expect concrete answers because we need a separate conversation, and I hope we'll have it. But do you have an answer?
But no, I mean, if I would have an answer, I would. I mean, I would be very happy. I think nobody has really an answer, but we can learn from others. So, for instance, I think there are two elements which are very key: defense, because a lot of innovation are linked to defense, and so the positive things is that. I mean, it's mostly negative, but the positive things of the war is that we, or a pre-war, is that we invest more in defense, and we know that most of the innovation are done in wartime period or in defense. So I think it's very important that if we have this kind of European defense concept, because you know, too often I think we don't see the link between American defense and innovation. You know, I think there is a very clear link. The second thing which struck me when I go to the US or when I go to China is the optimism. Well, I mean, maybe a bit less now in both of the country, but you know, they think they can make it, you know, while in Europe, too often, and in Brussels in particular, there is this kind of dooming mode. I was very impressed by when I was at the Berlin Sovereignty Summit, Digital Sovereignty Summit in November. It was a much better atmosphere than in Brussels. You know, in Brussels, everyone seems to be depressed. And of course, if you think that it will not work, it will not work. That is for sure. So, you know, I think that if we have a European defense based on innovation and we develop a positive spirit, we that would be two ingredients, I think, which would help a successful industrial policy.
Absolutely. Your plans for the next second half of 2026, what should we, your plans and what we should monitor most?
But I mean, my plan is I don't. I mean, I am not one who plans so much. Maybe that's my weakness. I mean, on the other hand, that's my strength because then I'm never disappointed because I don't have plans, so I cannot don't have targets, so I cannot miss my target. But yeah, I mean, it's clearly to work on this sovereignty debate and to try to yes, to try to work on the right ability and incentive to have a smart industrial policy, an effective industrial policy in Europe, because clearly we need one. Everyone recognizes that. The question is how. So that's a little bit on what I want to work with my colleague at CERRE and also myself.
And final recommendation to students.
Yeah, so I would say, well, the first thing is to know themselves and to be confident. What I have noticed over the years is that the people which are confident tend to make it better. No, I know it's not easy to get self-confidence if you don't get it at the beginning from your parents, but I think it's one thing, and I think by knowing oneself, you probably can gain more confidence. The second thing I would say is to be curious and versatile, not to be in a tunnel and doing always the same thing. You know, I think it's very important. So, for instance, my example, I did regulation, I did labor law, I did EMU, I work for politician, I work at the commission. I mean, being exposed to different environment, different field of law, different discipline, it's so great because it's open your mind. And you know, in the world of tomorrow, where you would need to be extremely resilient. I think that helps. And then maybe the last thing is building a network in people you trust. I was at the 50 years of the European University Institute last week, and which was really great. One thing which struck me, it was someone from the GRC of the Commission who said, you know, before knowledge, there is trust. And basically, it was nearly to say, but I don't want to paraphrase him, but it was nearly to say every knowledge at the end of the day is a trust issue. Because, if you are an economist, for instance, you will trust the paper which are published in American Economic Review. But, you will not do the experiment yourself. You will just trust them. Or you trust the paper in Nature or whatever. So I would say that, and I think it was interesting, because the conference was on knowledge, but he said at the end of the day, knowledge maybe doesn't exist. It's just a question of trust. So yes, knowing oneself, being versatile, and building network and of trust people is, I think, two advice I would give to anyone, student or even ourselves. Even you are less so, but you manage it you have implemented it probably already.
It's a nice shelter for me to ask recommendations for students and then to take critical marks of them. Alex De Streel, thank you very much for sharing your ideas with us.
Thank you very, very much, Alan.